Welcome to Irish Illustrated's Tracking the Trail. I'm Drew Mentocht, joined by our Notre Dame recruiting aficionado, Eric Thomas. We're bringing back a recruiting podcast in light of an incredible hot streak by the Fighting Irish on the trail. In the span of 10 days, Notre Dame earned commitments from four-star prospects, according to 24/7's composite rankings. One of those is, of course, Rodney Dunham, a borderline five-star prospect, and yet he may not have the most upside among the recent commits. The streak started when Ebenezer Ewetade pledged to Notre Dame on April 5th. He's long, lean, and raw. Eric, what makes Ewetade so special?
Yeah, man. Iwatade is a unique one. He is at his very best, freakishly fast off the line, like unguardably fast around the outside. He, as you mentioned, he's still lean. He's going to need to be able to add mass to sustain himself and really kind of tap into his, maximum power that he can kind of push into the offensive line when he's going. But he does do a good job of working with his hands. Like he's not highly advanced, but he does do a good job, especially the outside of working with his hands to create gaps and let his speed go. He has a little bit of a tougher time, working on the inside, trying to come back against runs, some things like that. But you can see that the tool set's there. Like he's not a weak player. He just needs to add strength, right? But for his size, he is pretty strong. He's able to get off tackles at his current level. So he's a really exciting player, and the sheer athleticism and speed coming off the edge is so unique and so value add advantage that I think for Iwatade, the sky is really the limit. He's going to probably need at least a year, maybe two, in a weight room to really tap into that.
And I saw from some of our coverage, it sounds like he started at wide receiver when he got to high school and then kind of transitioned over. So how new is he to like even playing defense and defensive line specifically?
Yeah, I believe he's only actually played it for the last year or two. I'd have to actually check the going back here, but it's still a very new thing for him. I think part of it, he's one of those prospects who in the last couple of years, kind of mid high school, he hit that growth spurt and kind of started to get a little bit bigger. His frame started to widen a bit, and that's when they really saw the utility there. But with his skill set, growing into that defensive line, I think it was always kind of something that could have been a possibility for him. They just saw the speed and all the other tools and like, all right, we need to get this guy catching passes in space. And then eventually he just grew too much to allow that to continue.
Well, it's interesting too because I know both these defensive ends kind of get compared to Bryce Young, but I mean, we'll see if either of them turn out to be 6'7", 6'8", like
Yeah.
Bryce Young has continued to grow. But I know we talked to like Micah Gilbert, who was Bryce Young's teammate in high school as well. Like they tried Bryce Young at wide receiver. I don't think he caught the ball very well, and then they kind of made that similar transition. So it does sound like he has a lot of those raw tools, and we really saw Bryce Young kind of explode from a recruiting like his reputation, I guess, as a prospect explode like from his like spring of his junior year into his senior year. Do you think it's possible we see like kind of similar trajectory for Iwatade?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit different with Young because even though he obviously grew quite a bit like that junior, senior, freshman year, and that really elevated things, he was a little bit different in his utility against the run than either of those guys. Even in high school, he was already a little bit bigger, wider, stronger, and so he provided more of that immediate lift, especially being able to work back to like the inside against guards trying to come up against the run. So there's a little bit of utility there that I think Bryce Young has that the other guys won't. And the other difference I guess I'll throw in is that Rodney Dunham actually tore his ACL in the last game of the season. So this senior season is going to be a little bit of that first year back. You're kind of uncertain if you're going to have 100% explosiveness or range of motion, even 100% confidence coming into the year. So there is a few factors that I think maybe limit the Bryce Young level upside towards the back end, but both of them are, elite caliber prospects that with a healthy season and the conditions being right could very well see an explosion like that. But there's quite a bit to prove, I think, to reach that Bryce Young level, especially against the run.
I just want to add on Iwatade. It's not just Notre Dame who kind of sees him this highly. He also had offers from Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Penn State. Um, so clearly, it's somebody that a lot of the other top programs in the country were starting to get on.
Mm-hmm.
We already talked about Dunham a little bit, but I watched You and 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting Andrew Ivins kind of discussed Dunham, who's a number 14 overall player in the class, according to 24/7. He's also another Charlotte guy, as we've kind of been talking about, or North Carolina guy. But we can get into all, like, we kind of just touched on his like potential, but can you talk about the backstory of his recruitment a little bit and how Notre Dame kind of closed on another one of the nation's top prospects before he even took official visits?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because last offseason, Dunham visited Notre Dame, and immediately it was like, oh, there's a connection here. There's a lot of mutual interest. We think that there's a good path forward with this guy. And I don't say that in that tone to be dismissive, but things kind of trailed off. Like it was really, really hot, and Notre Dame was kind of hot on the market for him, and things were moving in a good direction, and then it just sort of tapered off. He didn't get back on campus during the course of the fall, which usually is like, it's a little odd, for someone who's so interested. He visited Tennessee and South Carolina, I believe South Carolina multiple times, obviously closer schools to him geographically. So things seem to be trending a different direction. Now, talking with Notre Dame sources, there was still, contact being maintained. There was still a good relationship there. It was just difficult given the fact that they went on like a state title run and everything else going on for him to get out to campus. So when Dunham got back on campus later in March, he ended up, connecting with the Notre Dame coaches and kind of, I guess the best way to put it is just picking up where things left off. It didn't matter that there was a gap. It was just immediately like, all right, yeah, this is one of my top schools. I'm back with my guys. I think there's something to be said here too about the impact of Myron Tagovailoa Amosa on this recruitment. Obviously, I don't want to take away anything from Al Washington, Nick Sebastian, and the entire recruiting department. They've all done an excellent job here recently, and Al Washington in particular has really stepped up his game in this class. But I've heard from just sources around Notre Dame and sources around this recruitment that Myron is making a significant difference with these guys. As a former Notre Dame player and captain, he's able to relate to these guys. And because it was recent, he's able to relate to these guys in a little bit of a different way than most staffers will have the actual credibility to do. So I think that was a pretty key component, was sort of stoking that relationship here on this second visit and then picking up where things left off with Washington and crew. Really, I think during that visit, while he was on campus, Dunham realized what he wanted to do. It became transparently clear to him. Things kind of evolved. It took about 48 hours for the announcement for his commitment date and the crystal balls and all that. But that trip, I think it was the combination of that little something new along with just picked up right where you left off a year before. Those two things kind of came together perfectly, and Dunham found home.
And so just to kind of clarify, I know like when you look at like his 24/7 profile, it still shows like these upcoming official visits. Is he kind of completely shut down
Yeah,
right now? And okay. So will he still take his Notre Dame official visit at the normal time and then the rest are kind of off the table?
I believe so. I'd have to double check on the dates and everything because he may, shift his visits around to be like, oh, there's more people on this date. I might go. But
Yeah. And then 4 free
yeah,
weekends that he didn't have previously. So now that all makes sense too. So.
exactly. I think it's going to be fun maximization at this point.
And is there much of a connection between he and Ewetade? I know they're, kind of from similar areas.
I don't know of too much of a connection between those two. Iwatade is teammates with another top 100 prospect that Notre Dame's after on the offensive line. I believe they're familiar with each other, know each other, and uh, they're both involved in pretty serious programs down in North Carolina. I want to say that they've both done 7-on-7 in the past, but I have to verify that as well. I just remember seeing some clips of them, but I'd have to go back and look. But I don't actually know how much they know each other on like a personal basis, but I'm sure that that's going to increase.
And then on Sunday, the commitments continued when four-star offensive tackle Gregory Patrick committed to the Irish. He's from Portage Northern High School, just south of Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is less than an hour and a half away from Notre Dame's campus. I have a few questions about this prospect. His father, Joseph, played offensive line at Michigan State. His dad's also an active poster on the Spartan Tailgate, which is 24/7 Sports Michigan State website. So how did Notre Dame get this guy in the class who clearly his father and even his proximity to Michigan State. There's a lot of strong ties there.
Yeah, I've had the luxury of talking to Gregory a number of times. He's a really nice young man, and he's been pretty open about the fact that for him, as much as his dad was a legacy to Michigan State, and obviously he has a lot of love for the Spartans, the whole family does. He felt even last offseason a deep connection with Notre Dame. He lives close to that area. There's a lot of people around him who are fans, and he never really. From my first conversation with him, I asked him about that, and he sort of looked at it. He's like, "Yeah, it's out of state, but like they're also local and everything. I kind of see them all on the same playing field with that." Um, for Michigan State in particular, obviously there's been, I think we'll politely call it turbulence in that program over the last few years. The transition from Mel Tucker into Jonathan Smith, and then kind of getting into this new era of Michigan State football. I think that put them behind a little bit. Just the reworking staffs and the reworking visions for what this program is going to look like. It kind of put them behind the eight ball in the pursuit of a top prospect that, if we're just being frank, is kind of a big pull for Michigan State, even as a legacy, given their recent recruiting run. So, I think that Michigan State probably just organizationally was in a hole that they couldn't quite dig out of. That was really of no fault of any of the coaches or anything on that side. And then you look at Penn State and Michigan, the other competitors. Penn State, it seems from everything I'm picking up in this race, finished fourth. They were kind of fourth a lot of it. I think they made strong pushes, but ultimately there was just more of that connection with the other schools. And beating out Michigan made it interesting. Like, he consistently spoke about how much he liked them. He kept visiting. Michigan made him a priority for a long time, just like Notre Dame. But ultimately, where Notre Dame differentiated themselves was relationships with people. He said that to me just a couple weeks ago. Where I saw them differentiate themselves was talking to the players and getting to know the people, getting to see the brotherhood in the offensive line group as those guys go to compete, and getting to see that in practice, at practice, at a spring practice, but in practice is more what I'm saying. Like, culture is not something that's just talked about, was the quote he gave me. It's not something that's a talking point for recruitment and going through that process. It's something that's ingrained throughout the program. And that was so visible, so palpable to him. You could tell coming out of this last visit, it really kind of stuck with him. And he's mentioned stuff like that before, but I think whatever it was at that spring practice, whether it was his meeting or his dinner with Coach Rudolph or whatever it was after the fact, something about this version of what he saw really stuck with him, and it moved his timeline up significantly.
Interesting. And it's kind of going back to Michigan too. I mean, obviously it's an in-state guy. Sherm Moore used to coach offensive line when he was the offensive coordinator. They won back-to-back Joe Moore awards not that long ago. Like, I do think like that is pretty significant that Notre Dame was able to beat this kid out. I know like the western part of Michigan, having grown up in this area, is like a little more Notre Dame friendly than the eastern part of the state, where like once you get closer to Detroit and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that's pretty interesting for a guy. Whether I feel like there's some people who cover Michigan who might have said no, Michigan didn't prioritize him, but I feel like this is the type of guy that like Michigan couldn't just let walk. Like, he's an in-state guy, and you're known for offensive linemen, just like Notre Dame is.
Yeah, I bristle a bit at the Michigan didn't prioritize him. I think Michigan made him plenty of a priority over the past couple of years.
And so he joins a four-man offensive line class in 2026 now for Notre Dame. That also includes interior prospects Tyler Merrill, Ben Nichols, and Sullivan Garvin. Did I say the last one correctly?
Mm-hmm.
And the latter two are also Michigan products as well. Patrick is listed as a tackle by 24/7, but I know, like, reading Irish Illustrated's Tim Priester's kind of indicated in his tail of the tape that maybe Patrick is more of a guard prospect, or at least that's where he would excel more down the line. So in your mind, does Notre Dame kind of have four guard prospects in this class? And if so, like, do you see any tackles that they might be targeting in the future?
Yeah. I think they have 3.5 guards in this class. They do move guys around a lot. We saw it with Anthony Knapp. Like, he started at center, they moved him to tackle, and now it looks like he might move again. We're not sure. We see a lot of cross training in Joe Rudolph's offensive line room in particular. So it wouldn't shock me if Patrick goes into Notre Dame with the outlook of playing tackle, and by the end of his first spring is somewhere else. I think he has the tools, the length, and kind of what you're looking for of this class to be able to play right tackle specifically. I know Priester indicated that. I tend to agree with that, but I think his highest upside is at guard. And especially if you look at it as Sullivan Garvin is someone who's maybe going to kick inside and be, the next center behind Cam Herron or a competing center down the line. I think, you have 3 options at guard, but 4 total interior options, right? I think that there's a couple possibilities there. That said, it's not clear cut that Patrick is going to be a tackle prospect. And I'm not 100% sure that left tackle is his cleanest projection, just because predominantly left tackles are going to get a lot of the speed rush. And that's not necessarily his strongest aspect of his game. So when you look at the 5th spot here, it's really coming down to 2 guys. Now there's a few other people on the board. I don't want to get into, why is so-and-so up and down or whatever, but really it's 2. And that's, I think it's Grayson McKeough, from LaSalle College out here in Pennsylvania, teammate of Joey O'Brien, a top 100 prospect at safety that Notre Dame is hot after. He's a newer addition. He announced his offer just a few weeks ago. He announced his offer on March 27th. So 6'7", 275 basketball player, former tight end, which is exactly sort of the athletic and mobility background you want in a tackle. Really good player for a really good team that made it, to the state finals here or state semifinals here against Anthony Saka and St. Joe. So, it's a player with pedigree who's newer on the radar, but is really powerful, really big, and really mobile, ideal type tackle. The flip side of things is there's a higher ranked prospect at Kene Agboko. We talked about him earlier from South Garner. He's not necessarily as clean of a tackle prospect as McKeough is, but he's like top 5 caliber lineman in the class. Good. So Ekene is a little bit smaller. He's 6'6", so about an inch smaller total. I think his arms are probably noticeably smaller as well, or shorter as well, I should say. But he's got a big frame, moves well. He's more than mobile enough to pull as a guard. He looks like he has, once again, kind of like Patrick, that borderline mobility where it's like, yeah, he could play tackle, but he really should play guard. Those are kind of the last 2 guys that they're on. I think that they would take either. If you're looking for a specific tackle, that's definitely McKeough, but I think Notre Dame is very open to Agboko making his decision to come to South Bend.
Okay. That makes sense. And I do think it's worth noting, too, is that in 2025 that Notre Dame took Owen Streberg, Matty Augustin, who's looked pretty good this spring, to be honest, and then Will Black, who should arrive soon. So they got 3 legit tackle prospects in the last class. So if they're a little heavy on guard, I think they're in a spot where that's okay.
And Matty Augustin's high school coach told us months ago, I guess it was at signing day around then when we interviewed him, he was really bullish on Matty and his ability to come in and be someone to compete at Notre Dame, if not his first year, his second. Much more bullish than, the overall industry or the people assessing analysts and whatever. We asked him about, how does he compare? And he compared him to like former first round picks that he had worked with in high school. And then we asked him about Will Black, a guy he saw in the playoffs last year. And he said Will Black might be the best offensive tackle prospect he's ever seen. Like, just high praise. He was like, look, Matty can do a lot, but Will is just a different caliber kid, different caliber athlete. So especially with that note that Augustine's come in and look good, I think that, if Will Black comes in and lives up to the expectations of the same offensive line specialist who was coaching Matty Augustine, I think there's going to be 2 really good tackles, just assured, kind of put it in pen, coming in from this class.
Yeah, I mean, I won't ever forget seeing Will Black's like high school film and seeing him take a screen pass 50 yards for a touchdown and like running away from people at 300 pounds. So, yeah,
it's my favorite clip from last season.
Yeah. And then on Monday, wide receiver Bubba Frazier out of Benedictine Military School in Savannah, Georgia, also committed to Notre Dame, kind of, really ending this hot streak of 10 days. He's number 400 overall prospect in the class of 2026, according to 24/7 Sports composite rankings. I saw he ran a 10.74 in the 100-meter dash as a sophomore in high school. What does the 5'10" receiver have other than speed that he kind of can bring to Notre Dame?
Yeah, Bubba's an interesting one for folks that read Tim Priester's film evaluation of him, you'll see that, there's some question marks about kind of how he projects. I think what's most interesting about Bubba is just how verifiably explosive he is. He was laser time for a 4.43 40-yard dash. I believe he has a 40-inch vertical. When you watch him on tape, he is capable of like elevating in the air and making leaping grabs. And it's an imperfect comparison. They're very different players, but just visually, like it's almost similar to what we used to see with Chase Claypool, where like he can whip his body around and get like full extension the opposite direction. He has a little bit of that to him where he can just manipulate really agilely in the air. That being said, he's more of a make you miss kind of guy than a tackle breaker. If you get hands on him, there's a decent shot you're going to get him down, especially if you get him low. And I thought that, when you watch his routes, Priester noticed the inconsistency, but beyond even just the inconsistency in depth, there is a little bit of like that. He kind of tries to play to the space in the zone type deal, like a very feel-based receiver. And there's value in that, but especially for like if you have a guy like CJ Carr at quarterback who wants to be, in rhythm, timing, wants to find guys in space, it can be a little bit tougher for a quarterback to feel like they can trust that guy to just like, oh, I got to make this throw. So there's probably some growth that needs to happen there with like learning when to deploy that feel versus, kind of tightening it up and running. You're supposed to go 5 yards, go 5 yards. So there's definitely a learning curve, but for Frazier, I mean, you have a 4-star caliber athlete and a 3-star player is how I would describe it. And then I think that when you look at his utility for the program, it goes beyond just slot receiver. There is potential for him to get some looks out of the backfield. I would think predominantly those would still be pass catching or, odd opportunities, but still could do that. And I think he has a lot of potential utility on special teams. He's a really good returner. And he is very, very good at following blocks downfield. He knows how to kind of angle himself so guys can catch up and create the blocks upfield. He's very effective on screens. He's very effective on kick and punt return. So from that perspective, if you want to create structured looks for him, whether that's offensively or on special teams, there's a lot of ways to get that explosiveness out there that doesn't necessarily require him to be, a crisp downfield route runner.
Interesting. So I kind of didn't put this in our notes for him, but what do you want to see from him, I guess, a little more this fall as he kind of finishes off his high school career?
Yeah, I want to see him win more with his developed skill set rather than his tools. Right now, he runs a route, he's breaking, and he's faster than you, so he's going to get, those first few couple of steps, and he's more explosive than you, so he'll jump out in front of you and make the catch. But at the next level, these guys are going to, bridge the gap. So what I want to see is more of the technical points. Like, can he create separation not just by being faster out of his break than you, but by actually, using a move and triggering the defender's eyes to go the wrong direction, and you create that split second? Can he be a little bit more effective on like comebacks, curls, and your basic like on-time routes, right? The things that require discipline. I think stuff like that is the next step. I do think it's probably fair to note that he's not asked to do a lot of that in the offense. Like sometimes players are perfectly capable of these things and they're just not asked to do them. So that is part of it. But I want to see more like keep things on time. He's a very good out of structure player. And he does well on timing routes, winning with his physical tools. I'd like to see him win more with his receiver toolbox.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I'll be kind of curious how he develops. I mean, if I'm being honest, wide receiver has been Notre Dame's weakest position group since Marcus Freeman took over the program a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they've had one 500-yard receiver in a season. That was Jaden Greathouse last year, and it took him 16 games and kind of historic performances in the semifinals and championships games to do it. I know they also have Dylan Faison, the younger brother of Jordan Faison, in this class, and I think he's one of the lower rated prospects. I'm not going to hold that against him given what Jordan did as a walk-on.
Yeah.
But I still believe the wide receiver room is starting to improve based on the talent that's currently on campus or what's about to arrive this summer. But what does the rest of the wide receiver board look like right now?
Yeah, the wide receiver board really starts with Caden Finley, Jermichael Finley's son. Texas prospect. He was top 100. I think he's just outside now, but he's still, top 150 4-star player. 6 foot right now. The expectation from sources in Texas and South Bend is that he could continue to grow. I think, I don't know if he's ever going to reach his dad's like 6'5", 6'4.5", but he's definitely one of those guys to watch for like, oh, he showed up tall. Finley's interesting because he's really long. He's got really long arms, really long legs. He's an explosive athlete vertically and sort of launching himself horizontally. So he can do a lot of the boundary receiver type stuff in what looks more like a field receiver package. He's very quick. He's a good route runner. That quickness accentuates obviously out of the break, and he's able to create separation. He's very tough to bring down when he gets ahead of steam, and he is a dude as a blocker. Like he relishes, his highlight tape's full of it. He relishes the opportunity to just finish dudes into the sideline. And when you see a high school receiver who's like giddy about perimeter blocking, it just fills me with joy. So he's definitely the top guy on the board. I've had that expressed to me several times from Notre Dame. I have a crystal ball in for him to land with Notre Dame. They have said to me a number of times, sources around South Bend, that they believe that they're in the lead there. So Texas, Texas A&M, and a few other ones like Arizona State, UCLA are involved, but it's really going to come down to most likely Texas, Notre Dame, and then Texas A&M is fighting to make it a 3-horse race. Beyond that, Braden Robinson is another guy I've been close to throwing a crystal ball in. I think things are probably more interesting with the Miami Hurricanes than some Notre Dame folks would like. I spoke with some sources down there because he was at South Bend for the spring game. Week before, he was down in Coral Gables. Miami loves him. There was a little bit of question on whether they wanted to add a guy at his size again, because they apparently have a few receivers or athletes in that room that are about his size, but staff loves him. Visit went really well for both parties. Sources Miami told me that they had a heightened sense of optimism, not confidence, but optimism with him coming out of the visit. So I think that Miami's going to make it interesting. Ohio State's a tough one. They're one of his other finalists along with Arizona because he's not the top of the board guy for them. That's kind of what happens when you have Brian Hartline as your OC and you can pick and choose 5-star receivers. Natural consequence. So if Ohio State really makes him a top of the board priority, I don't think they've made him feel like he's not, but there's a level to this. So it's a little bit tough for me to forecast him just because of those unknowns, but I think Notre Dame has the lead. I think that they are, the provisional pole sitter for one of the fastest players in the class. And then the last one I'll mention here, just kind of looking at the full scope of the board, there's an interesting possibility with Brian Williams, Lake Mary wide receiver. He plays with Noah Grubbs. I think he's listed at 6'4". He's probably like 6'3", 6'3.5". Good player, really came on strong last year during their playoff run. He consistently presented a good target for Grubbs to throw to. His role is a little bit interesting because the Lake Mary offense is very, very vertical. So you don't see Williams doing as much as you might see a traditional boundary number one doing, just in terms of versatility. There's a lot of downfield stuff. There's a lot of deep cutting routes and things like that. But other than just the little bit of, not the negative, but just a little bit of oddity with how their offense is so far downfield. Williams is a player who I think is going to ascend this year as a senior, especially working with Noah Grubbs. He's in line to be the number one target on offense this year, along with, I believe they have a kid coming back, Carson Hinshaw, but he might have graduated. So there's a few different targets there, but Williams sort of has the promise of becoming an emerging number one for what should be one of the most explosive offenses in Florida this fall.
And do you have a sense on how many receivers Notre Dame wants in this class, or is that kind of fluid depending on which of the guys they could kind of get to commit potentially?
A lot of these are fluid. Ideally, I think they want 4. You would do sort of like preliminary view. If Notre Dame landed Faison, Frazier, Finley, your 3 Fs, and then Robinson as well, I think they'd be very happy with that class. There's other guys involved too, like Mason James, who I didn't mention from Oklahoma, and a few others. But if they landed that 4-man class, they'd be happy. If, let's say, Norman, Oklahoma native Mason James wants to come to Notre Dame and some of these announcements time out, well, then maybe they would stretch to 5, but it would have to be the right 5. I don't think Notre Dame would go beyond 4 unless that class included Caden Finley at the very least, and likely Braden Robinson. I think those two, it's basically, James, do you want to jump in with those two at that point? But other than that, I think you're more than likely looking at, 4 optimally. 3 is kind of like we check the boxes, but we would have liked one more.
So even in light of this, that 10-day stretch for Notre Dame, got 4 commitments. There could be more good news on the way in the next month or so when 2 more Irish targets announce their commitments. First, 4-star running back Javian Osborne out of Forney, Texas, will announce on May 3rd. He's a number 83 overall player in the class, according to 24/7 Sports Composite. He's picking between Notre Dame and Michigan, which puts the Irish against former running backs coach Tony Alford, who joined from Ohio State in Ann Arbor a few years ago. Osborne was on campus for the Blue Gold game, but it sounds like he will be visiting Michigan this weekend. I'm not, just based on what I read. What are you sensing for his recruitment right now? And also, what type of running back is the 5'10", 195-pound prospect?
He is an awesome running back. Osborne is like unreal. Just like quick hitters, player with breakaway speed. He can run away from the defenses when he gets a good head of steam coming downhill. His ability to make guys miss is high end, especially his jump cuts. His jump cuts are obscene. He will cut across your face and continue running at full speed before you even have a chance to recognize what happened. And his tape is just full of defenders almost looking like helpless as they try to get at him, because he's so much quicker than them. His most noteworthy trait, though, in my opinion, is his balance through contact. It's exceptional. You hit him low, you get a hand on his ankle, doesn't matter. He's out of there. You hit him square in the chest with your shoulder, doesn't matter. He's probably going to bounce off. You get 2 hands on him and he still has a full head of steam, he's probably going to run right through you. He is not someone that is going to go down through an arm tackle or through even just like one pop him hit in the chest. Like, that's not who he is. So he's a complete back. He has a lot of utility as a pass catcher. I don't know that he's a natural catcher of the football the way that, maybe like a Kyron Williams was. Like, those guys look exceptional, but the tools and utility are there, right? Like, when he gets his hand on the ball, once the operation's clean, he's going to go. The other thing that I like about Osborne is that when he attacks down the field to the second level, he is very cognizant of how to approach to maximize his gains. Like, if he needs to really just hit the gas and get to the corner and get around a defender because they won't have the angle, he'll do so. But if he sees a teammate coming across that can make a block and he needs to slow up a little bit, he'll do it as well. Like, he's not one of those players who has just impulse, get to the end zone. He's very aware of what's happening around him. He allows plays to develop around him. He's an exceptional running back, and frankly, number 8 seems too low for me. But once again, that's composite ranking, right? That's the whole industry, and you look at that, and that's reflective, and it's data points. But I'm very bullish on Javian Osborne. I think he has the potential to be really special. You look at what Jadarian Price is and what his skill set looks like at its top end, and I think Osborne compares very favorably to Price. Although I think that even as a high school prospect, there's a lot less of that indecision and kind of slowness to process behind the line of scrimmage, that half second where it can become tackle for loss. There's none of that in his game. It's just a very clean operation all the way through.
That's interesting. And that's really the biggest knock against Price is his desire to maybe bounce the foot outside or not see the hole. Obviously, we've seen him improve over that, and he dealt with the Achilles injury. But if you could have a more refined version of Price, if you think that's kind of what he projects as, that's a pretty excellent prospect there.
Yeah.
So what do you I know it sounds like it's just between Notre Dame and Michigan at this point. What do you is he still visiting Michigan upcoming, and kind of where is his process right now?
Yeah, he'll be at Michigan this weekend. I believe their spring game is this weekend, so it's kind of like last look. Notre Dame is the leader, and I don't know what Michigan can really do to upset the apple cart. Osborne spoke about feeling more like he was home this last trip. He spoke about, his dad, he and his dad laughing about how he already knew, hi buddy, where he was going, and kind of like, oh yeah, I got a feeling. it sounds like Notre Dame basically buttoned this one up with the trip this last weekend, but he is going to Michigan. He is going to, kind of speak with them. He told, I believe it was Mike Roach, that he specifically wanted to speak more with like the Michigan front office. Now that could be any number of conversations. That could be NIL. That could be conversation about kind of how he projects on the actual roster his first year, whatever it is. But it sounded like the conversations he has left to go with Michigan are more with their personnel department, which indicates to me it's background. They're trying to, figure out what would this look like or, whatever else. But I think he's going to Notre Dame. I think he knows he's going to Notre Dame. He has been sort of active on the Notre Dame social media sphere and engaged with commitments and, with other prospects. He's mentioned, I can't recall now off the top of my head who, but he tweeted at someone like, yo, we gotta link up and actually play football at next level together. I believe that may have been Joey O'Brien. Like, there's been a couple of little things like that it just looks like it's going to end up being Notre Dame for him. And on the NIL front, because this is something whenever Michigan gets brought up now, it's going to worry people. Of course, when money is put in front of someone and the opportunity is there, it's going to change versus, and, oh, well, that's not the priority of this recruitment. But just talking to people around there, NIL is not the priority in Osborne's recruitment. It is not. He's very connected with his faith. He's very connected with the possibility of opportunities, academically and beyond football. He's very cognizant of sort of the cultural and built player environment at each school. And he's very, very definitive about the relationships he has, whether that's with the roster or the coaches being the driving factor in this. And his dad was as well. And I have no reason but to believe that is the earnest intention here. That's what separated Notre Dame and what pushed them to the front of this list here in the last few weeks. So, from where I'm sitting, having spoken with them, several times and just kind of speaking to people around the market, I'd be very hard pressed to see this going any other way but him committing to Notre Dame on May 3rd.
Okay, wow. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, it's always, if you're Notre Dame a bit, you don't want him visiting anywhere else before his commitment, and you would like you to have the last visit. But I mean, those are all sounds like very encouraging things for Notre Dame with him, and it sounds like that's a pretty special player they could be getting a commitment from soon.
Yeah.
And so a week after that, 3-star defensive tackle Tiki Hola is committing on May 10th. He's down to Notre Dame, USC, and SMU. He's another Texas prospect. So Notre Dame could potentially be getting 3 commitments from Texas prospects in a row. But describe his game, and can Notre Dame beat out Chad Bowden, the program's former GM, who's now at USC?
So I'll start with the latter question. Yes, they can. USC's faded in this recruitment. They're in it. They are a finalist. They will be a hat on the table. But just speaking with sources around Texas and Los Angeles, it seems like that was kind of a mutual, like, he realized things were trending another way. USC is already at 22 commits in the class or whatever it is, and several of them are D linemen. I think both parties recognized that this was probably not going to be the way this things went out in the last couple of weeks here. SMU is tough. Obviously, Notre Dame went up against them last year with Jalen Cooper, and we're on the losing end of that one. So it's not to be taken for granted the way maybe it was 3-4 years ago that SMU is kind of a pushover on the recruiting trail. That being said, once again, I have a crystal ball in for Notre Dame to win this one. I fully expect them to. There's a couple of items at play here. One, once again, going right back to it, Myron Tagovailoa Mosa. Hola is Polynesian. His family, obviously, is a big important factor to him. That's sort of a cultural of cultural importance to that community. And I've seen it discussed that obviously SMU has had some success with players in the Polynesian community recently. They have a strong pipeline of people there and a network to be able to tap into, but so does Notre Dame. And having Myron on staff for, this last round of visits where he was here last weekend, I think that's going to ultimately make a massive impact and just creating that comfortability and that level of, hey, you can thrive here, even if it's in the middle of Indiana. Hola is probably going to end up at nose tackle. He's a little bit shorter at 6'2". He's not exceptionally long like his arms, but he is strong as an ox. And he can play with strength at extension, which is important. He doesn't need to have guys up in his body and kind of, have him here to be able to have full strength. He can fully extend, which is important for him because it allows him to keep visibility in the backfield. He doesn't have a ton of utility as a pass rusher right now, but he's excellent against the run, in no small part because of that ability to play at extension. Keeps visibility on the running back. He can cause chaos by basically whipping the tackle into the hole and causing bounce outs, or he can penetrate himself on sort of a second level and, make tackles at or around the line of scrimmage. So he's more of an anchor, like going to hold the line than he's going to penetrate into the backfield type player, but he's a really strong nose tackle prospect who I think would project well for Notre Dame, and particularly with what they like to do in Al Washington's defense and kind of moving those guys around a little bit. I think that they can unlock a little bit more utility for him. But he's, I think he'll end up at Notre Dame. SMU is going to make a strong push as the local school, but he's a strong religious presence. He's someone who has mentioned several times that academics are important to him, and like so many of the guys recently, he's really he's noted the differentiation of the relationships he's built at Notre Dame a couple of times. And with what we've seen recently, that seems to be a major driving point in how the Irish are trying to flip this, this cycle into some serious momentum, and doing so. I think that's going to continue with him. It's just tracking the right way.
It's interesting you mentioned his long arms too, because I've heard, like, for instance, like Jason Kelsey talk stuff like that, and how much he struggled with like defensive tackles who were shorter than him but also had length that was bigger than his, and how much trouble that is, because then they can get under, the defensive tackle could get under him and then also out leverage him in certain ways too. So those are pretty unique or interesting traits that I think maybe you're like, oh, Notre Dame, we have these bigger guys like Jason Anye at Notre Dame and stuff like that. But sometimes those guys, if you have length and you're a little smaller, like, that can be used to your advantage as well, as we've seen with some other guys. So it's definitely
Absolutely
intriguing. And kind of sticking with the defensive line, like, given the commitments from Dunham and Ewetade, Notre Dame is on track to put together one of the program's best defensive line classes in some time. But obviously they still work to do at defensive tackle. What's your update on 4-star prospects Elijah Golden and Mikhail Blade? And is there anyone else in addition to Tiki Ola Notre Dame fans should be aware of for that board right now?
Yeah. I'll start with Golden. Seems to be, he'll be at Notre Dame this week. He'll come back for an official visit in June. I expect Notre Dame to be right there, among the top group. I also would anticipate that Alabama is going to make it to the end there, as well as Virginia Tech and likely Florida. Michigan was a one-time big player in this recruitment. That no longer appears to be the case. I don't 100% know what happened there, but I know he was dropped from their top targets board on 247. And speaking with sources over the last few months, it seems like Michigan either felt that they weren't involved enough to continue pursuing him, or felt that they were better, their time was better spent elsewhere. So a little bit interesting in how that ties in, because Michigan is probably the number 2 team for Mikhail Blade. So they're obviously still kind of a factor in these various recruitments. Blade has a lot of Midwest interest in particular. He has offers from all over the country, but he seems to be particularly interested in Big Ten country, Midwest. I would say it's Notre Dame and Michigan right there at the top. I think Notre Dame has set the pace throughout this recruitment and continues to do so coming out of this last visit, but Michigan's definitely made it interesting. I fully expect they're going to, be a finalist and get consideration down to the end. And ultimately with the defensive line class, timing matters, right? Like Mikhail Blade and Elijah Golden are both guys that could potentially, move to the interior, but they're not necessarily interior guys. They might be better served as strong side defensive ends. So if that's the case, and if that's the way they see themselves, well, if Dunham, Ewetade are in, and let's say a guy like Elijah Golden commits, is Mikhail Blade going to want to come to Notre Dame with 3 blue chip defensive ends? Maybe not. So there is a little bit of calculus with that too, with like, as you add talent, these guys are more aware of the talent you've added around them. That kind of dovetails into the next point. There's 2 other defensive ends in particular I would note that Notre Dame is in good standing with, and that would be Dre Quinn, prospect from down in Atlanta, and Xavier Griffin Haynes, another North Carolina prospect. Quinn noted that Notre Dame was, I don't remember what his exact quote was, maybe top 5, or they were in his top group or whatever he said, at leaving his visit a couple weeks ago. And Griffin Haynes had his second visit to Notre Dame canceled this offseason. He was supposed to come in January, couldn't make it. Supposed to come a couple weeks ago, couldn't make it because of weather. And yet, like 48 hours later, came out and said Notre Dame was in his top 2 schools with Georgia. So they're in very good positions with those guys. Like they need to continue to get FaceTime and get some in-person opportunities there, especially with Griffin Haynes. But they're in a good enough spot that those guys would be considered competitive. And then the last one I'll throw out here is Noah Clark, defensive lineman, interior lineman from North Carolina as well. He's down to a top 5. I don't have those schools in front of me. 1 second, but he's down to a top 5 that includes Notre Dame, and he came out and said that all 5 of those schools were on equal footing. So that's Notre Dame, NC State, Virginia Tech, South Carolina, and Virginia. So coming out of this Notre Dame visit, it sounds like, for his first time on campus, it went very well. He was very impressed. Notre Dame liked him as well, and there's going to continue to be a push there. He's your most likely second, like number 2 interior lineman here. Your traditional 3 tech at 6'4", 330. Just a really solid, stout 4-star player. It's a little bit tougher to feel confident about where he's going to land just because he seems so open at this stage of his recruitment. But Notre Dame definitely helped themselves, and ultimately for what he's described as his priorities in a school, they track well.
Interesting. And I know you mentioned a couple, canceled visits, but I will say being in South Bend, our weather really has been quite tumultuous this spring. So sometimes that's a pretty big red flag, but there's been, I've never seen so many trees toppled over from weather, having grown up here as well. So it has been kind of dicey. So I don't know all of his specifics, but I can confirm that the weather could be a reason to cancel a visit right now. So Notre Dame just held the 94th annual Blue Gold game. I've been at practice too this spring, when they've, kind of opened it to the media, and the Irish athletic complex is always full of prospects and their parents, watching. So are there any other recent visitors you want to highlight or discuss before we wrap up?
Yeah, there's a few guys who have been on campus throughout the course of the spring that are important. We talked about Caden Finley. He was on campus a few weeks ago, their number 1 receiver target. He still does have spring visits to other schools, but I'm just continuing to hear that Notre Dame is setting themselves apart there, and that they feel that they have enough of a lead, to be confident moving into, out of the spring and into the summer here in the next month or 2. Another one I'll mention, Brian Bonner, running back from Valencia, California. Top 100 player, really, really fast, explosive running back. He's like turbocharged. He's so quick. He's maybe not quite the all world, oh my God, that's a running back prospect as Javian Osborne, but he's still a really, really good player. I think a lot of what he does, if you want to compare it to someone in the current Notre Dame running backs room, a lot of it probably compares pretty favorably to Aeneas Williams. I don't know that he's quite as good of a pass blocker, just like off the rip as Williams is, because he's exceptional. But just in terms of the overall versatility and kind of the ability to switch from one role to the next within a sequence is pretty impressive. He's really fast, and it allows him to not only be dynamic as a running back, taking carries the distance, but as a route runner out of the backfield, he can really put the defense in some compromising positions. He's someone who I've forecasted to Notre Dame. He has a few finalists: Georgia, Penn State, Washington, I believe UCLA, but it's really going to come down to Stanford and Notre Dame from what I've been told. Kenny Agboko, we mentioned the offensive lineman, was on campus recently, and then Grayson McHugh, the offensive tackle, will be on campus this week. So there's quite a bit of movement on that offensive line side of things. And then I know, just kind of looking at, we have the list here. Pardon me, just want to get it pulled up in front of me because I can't get to load my computer. They hosted a wide receiver earlier this week, Gordon Sellers. 4-star wide receiver in the 2026 class. Visit went well. I'm hearing the visit went well, but the reason you hear some of the surprise in my face is Gordon is committing on Friday. Clemson is the perceived favorite. That would be the third wide receiver prospect Notre Dame would lose out to Clemson on in this cycle if he were to commit there. They only offered him like last week. So they're really coming at the end here. It sounds like they came on strong and made a good impression, but like I really have a hard time getting a sense on if it's going to be too little too late, or even if it's like for Notre Dame, if this was almost just the expected path and they're like, look, go ahead and commit where you're going to commit, that just puts a target on that school's back because we're going to keep coming. So there's a few different ways for this thing to move forward. The latter is kind of my assumption, and kind of what I've gotten from speaking with some folks. But with how good the feedback was from the visit, I am curious to know if there's actually more of an effort now to like, hey, maybe push this off a couple weeks. I don't know that would be successful. I don't know that he would want to do that, but I am curious to know if Notre Dame's kind of pushing that button a little harder now after how well things went. And then the last one I'll mention here before I kind of let you take over again, Kari Adams, top corner, one of the top corners in the country, was just at Notre Dame recently, had a great visit. Notre Dame sources probably expressed their highest degree of confidence about landing him throughout this entire cycle after that visit. And he announced, I think it was yesterday, maybe this morning, but I think it was yesterday, that he will no longer be taking his visit to USC this spring. Sounds like the Trojans are out. So there is a little bit of movement. Ooh, sorry, Cat. There is a little bit of a movement in his order right now. I would anticipate, as much as he's down to like, I think it's like 10-ish schools are in competition. I would anticipate it's Penn State, Notre Dame, and Oregon. USC, I would originally thought was going to be in that, but with them falling out, it does clear the lane a little bit for Notre Dame to, feel a little bit more confidence here. 6'2" corner, exceptionally sticky in coverage. He basically glues himself to the receiver's hip and doesn't let up. He's one that if Notre Dame were able to pull that off, I know, we were really bullish about the cornerback class last year. And I think at least one of our colleagues, and I don't remember the list off the top of my head, had Mark Zachary as the number one player in the class. And there's a lot of bullishness. Adams is like that type of player again. He could be like top prospect in the class caliber. So definitely one to monitor from the recent visitors.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about where Notre Dame is in terms of just cornerback and defensive back development compared to the work 5 years ago. I mean, I know I was critical of the wide receiver position earlier, but it's complete opposite there. And even, I don't know, you'll obviously know, just update us on his recruitment, but it's at the point where like, you're like, why wouldn't a guy like that come to Notre Dame just based on what they've been able to do and develop there? And also worth noting, just we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon, but it's actually going to run Friday. So there may be more developments. I know you said somebody was announcing on Friday. So we'll kind of see what happens. But I just wanted to clarify that for our listeners. But with that, thanks to everyone who's tuned in to Irish Illustrated's Tracking the Trail podcast. Eric, I really enjoyed getting to learn more about the latest Notre Dame recruiting news and the team's banner start to April. I know fans were getting a little anxious after Notre Dame's playoff run, where it kind of seemed like not a lot was going on, but obviously there was some shakeup with, front office personnel and things like that. But it sounds like Notre Dame has really kind of gotten on the right foot again here this spring. So everyone, be sure to check out irishillustrated.com for more in-depth recruiting coverage from Eric and our other recruiting reporter, Brian Alt. With that, I'm Drew Mentok with Eric Thomas, both of Irish Illustrated. We'll see you all soon.